Well, hello everybody, and welcome to Miskatonic University Radio, a podcast exploring fantasy flight games as Arkham Horror, the card game. I'm Dane,
I'm Dan.
I'm Ben.
and today we're going to be spoiling a new card from the Scarlet Keys, and we have a couple guests to help us through it. Dan, who are these people?
We have two very special guests. We have returning to the podcast for the several time. I can't remember exactly how many, but always fun to have. Is MJ, who I think people probably are familiar with you, but can you introduce yourself briefly? Just clue people in on.
Yeah, I would hope so. I'm MJ Newman. I am the lead designer of Arkham Horror, the card game. Ta-da!
Very cool. And joining us for the first time, a man who we've just learned can do a very convincing sort of bird call noise out of his mouth with his hand, is Duke, who we met you briefly at Arkham Nights last year. Duke, why are you here?
I am also a designer on the Arkham Horror card game. I'm Duke Harris, and it's good to see you all.
Very cool, very cool. Yeah, I think we met you. We talked about this a little bit when we did an episode about our Arkham Nights experience, but we were just playing A Light in the Fog in the kind of back room at the Game Center, and I think you just kind of wandered by and you were like, "Oh, hey, I designed that," and we kind of had a fun chat about it. So that's the kind of like fun coincidence that can only happen at Arkham Nights, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Great.
I've had moments like that at Gen Con.
Yeah, at Gen Con, you probably can't like throw a stick without hitting somebody that's worked on something that you've played, right?
True. But then like it's really funny too that like sometimes it'll like, oh, that's just someone who's running this event, right? And then someone else will be like, no, that's like the lead designer. And they're like, what? And that's always funny.
That's definitely funny.
They've taken corporeal form? What?
Yeah, they've manifested themselves. So Duke, like I said, I think people are pretty familiar with MJ, but can you, since this is your first time on the show, can you maybe tell us a little bit about just I see you've got all of like the return to boxes there behind you. Can you just tell us a little bit about what your history with Arkham Horror the card game is like, and sort of how you came to be a designer on it?
Yeah, totally. Been playing board games for a long time and really enjoying like connecting with people and playing them. And I was first in on Arkham Horror the card game. Oddly enough, I hadn't been previewed on the game. Like I hadn't seen any previews for it, but I was in a board game shop. I think the week it came out, and I was like, "Wait, this is a thing." And so I bought it and I took it home and I played it. I played everything as soon as it came out because it quickly became my favorite game. And in 2018 or somewhere in there, I was actually living in Colorado, finishing a novel I was working on, and some people in my life were like, "Oh, you're always playing and making board games. Why aren't you trying to do that for a living?" So I ended up as an intern at FFG in spring of 2019, right when you may have heard of this little thing called the Innsmouth Conspiracy was sort of like, rolling out. And I got to work with MJ there, and it was a pretty awesome experience. Like, oh wait, you made this thing, and now I get to make this thing with you. Um, and so while that was in development and we were working on it. I got to work on the Light in the Fog Mythos pack. I've stayed really close. I'd stayed really close with FFG since then, and started about a year ago at FFG. It's my 1 year anniversary this month. So
Nice, congratulations.
Hey, congrats.
Yeah, what Duke is leaving out is that we do like an intern project when we have an intern. It's like the culmination of their internship at FFG, and it's usually something like fairly small. It's like you're gonna design like a few cards for this game, or a keyword for this game, or this, that, or the other thing. And Duke is just like, I'm gonna make a whole scenario, and he just made a whole scenario, and it was really good. So I just put it into Innsmouth with like minimal changes. And that's why like later on when it was like, all right, we're gonna hire someone, I was like, this guy, hire him, please. And they did.
Very cool. Yeah, and I mean not just any scenario, but a pretty cool one. It's gotta be said,
it's very fun. I like it.
Yeah. So Duke, just because you have this perspective of sort of like starting as a fan of the game and eventually coming to work on it, do you have like a favorite investigator or a favorite scenario or campaign kind of the stuff that was around before you joined FFG?
Oh gosh. I mean, uh, yeah. I mean, I was a huge Silas fan, mostly because I was super into Silas and I thought his ability was pretty awesome.
Mm.
Um, but so that was like he was probably my go-to investigator for a while. But I also really ended up liking. Actually, this is kind of cheating, but Trish is another favorite investigator of mine too. Um, and I just love the whole like spy aspect and how she gets in and she just covertly gets the clues. Um, and it's really hard to pick a favorite because I've had great experiences with every single campaign. Um, I held on to, before I was an intern, I made themed cheese plates and things for the Path to Carcosa campaign. Like,
Wow.
and I got really into it. One of my best friends and I would play it like late into the evening, and when we played Phantom of Truth first time, and the organist came out, I was like, wait, John, and I went and I got, I think this was like at 11 in the evening, and I had two roommates, and I got like a speaker, and I brought out Phantom of the Opera, and I just blared it real loud and did like an interpretive dance of the organist as we were playing. Um, so yeah, I got really into the game then. I haven't told MJ that story.
No, you hadn't. I'm sitting here like,
We need to talk
what?
more after this cast about cheese plates.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, we made it
We
the yellow sign in honey with the cheese plate and everything too. So
we used to torture people at our table whenever somebody drew torturous chords and failed the test. We used to play toccata and fugue in D minor, whatever it is, really really loud. So that's a scenario that has a lot of room for fun musical interpretations. I think
I just play Phantom of the Opera.
that works too. Yeah,
Also a good one.
yeah. Wow, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I mean, definitely. Congrats on your on your 1 year spot. That's really neat.
thanks.
So I think we wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about the new campaign, which we're all very excited about. I know you can't obviously, anything that hasn't kind of been revealed yet, you gotta stay hush hush. But we're really excited about just the sort of like the nonlinear format and the way that it's scenarios. It's like the first and last scenarios are fixed, but the rest can be played in any order, right? Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
So one thing that we know is there's like a world map that has both the Scarlet Keys scenario locations on it, but also some of the existing standalone locations.
It does.
So we love the standalones. Is this like a campaign that is it really going to kind of lend itself well to maybe like mixing in a whole bunch of standalones and making like an epic kind of marathon campaign?
Yes, yeah. You can absolutely integrate any or all of those standalones into the Scarlet Keys in a much more I want to say like thematic way than in previous campaigns where it's like we have 2 nights to complete this task and it's like let's go to Venice.
Yeah, let's take a boat to Italy or whatever,
Yeah, like canonically it makes a lot more sense in this campaign, and there's even specific like new rules for embarking on side stories in this campaign that kind of alters how those side stories work. So, and I'm sure everyone here also watched the in-flight report at Gen Con, but you might even notice on that world map that's up on the screen that there is a side story location that doesn't currently have a side story attached to it. What's that about? Kind
I
of
mean,
weird.
I think
we are a little
Arkham
curious. Yeah.
I don't know.
Arkham
What is
Knights
that
was,
about?
was just announced. And it does mention a new scenario at Arkham Knights, so I'm
We'll see.
suspicious. I'm suspicious we might be going to that location. So
I gotta say, as an old Elder Troyer player, anytime I see like a world map with these little lines connecting stuff, it gets me a little excited. I'm excited for this. So
What I love about this too, it's kind of hard to tell unless you really like have the map in front of you, but we paid a lot of attention to what routes you would be using in the 1920s to get from one place to another. So the plane routes look like plane routes. The sea routes actually follow like the route a boat would take in that time. Some of those are rails that existed in the 1920s and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of attention to detail on that map. That's really cool.
That's
why,
really cool. So,
some of them are like arcs, but other ones, actually weave between like the various rivers and roads.
Yeah, exactly. Like the ones that look like just straight lines, those are just plain routes. But some of them are more like in line with where you would be going in the 1920s if you were like following a railroad or something.
Well, and like
Oh.
the Panama Canal was like new technology in the 1920s. Like that had just been built,
Mhm.
right? So I see like it looks like the route from kind of like the Caribbean down to like Quito or something goes right through
Yeah.
there. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just talking about standalones a little bit more. Do like those kind of middle 6 scenarios of Scarlet Keys do those have kind of like a standalone mode? Like, do you think those would work well as standalones mixed into some other campaign? Maybe some of them.
They all like every scenario in Arkham Horror the card game, they're all playable in standalone mode, and it's even kind of in some ways it's even cooler because Scarlet Keys has this big clock basically. You're racing against time. And that's why like what route you take through the world matters, because if you take a really long-winded route, you might not get to play all of the scenarios, or you might miss out on other things that are scattered around the world. So likewise, when you're playing in standalone mode, you can kind of just choose like how much time has passed in the campaign when I'm playing this standalone version of this scenario. Because some of the scenarios change drastically depending on whether you play them early or late. So that's really exciting to me.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's something that we were curious about, is like in a typical campaign where the scenarios happen at more or less a fixed, order, there's usually the later ones are kind of harder, like the challenge ramps up a little bit. So it sounds like there's some sort of like more flexible like difficulty scaling thing that's going to make the later scenarios harder, even though you can be playing them in any order.
Yeah, there's a couple scaling factors. I won't go into all of them, but there's a few different levers that are being hit at different moments depending on like the order you played the scenarios, what other locations you've hit before you went to certain scenarios, what information you possess, and of course the time, how much time has passed. Like there's a lot of different factors that could tie in, and there's even a couple of scenarios that like you don't even have access to at the beginning of the campaign. Like even right after the prologue, you've got to figure some stuff out first, and that's really cool. There's one scenario in particular that's basically hidden.
You have to figure out the
Nice.
proper attunement quests to unlock the door.
You gotta find the staff of Ra in like Nepal or whatever, and then bring it to Egypt or something.
So, like I've said this before on podcasts, but like one of my favorite things in video games is like I beat Bloodborne, right? And then I go back and I play Bloodborne again, and I go into this area and I'm like, whoa, I didn't know this whole area existed. What? This is crazy. So I really want people to have that experience when they play the Scarlet Keys. They get through the whole campaign and they're like, there's 3 decks I didn't even open. Like what? You know what I mean? That's what I want.
Like, I didn't even know we had a basement, and there it is.
Yeah, exactly.
It is just sprawling in like epic in a really cool way. I think players are really gonna love it.
Yeah, someone mentioned time and order matter. Yeah, one of my inspirations for this campaign was Mega Man. Specifically like the Mega Man X series, where it's like, yeah, you can play any of the bosses in any order, but if you do this one first, then it affects this stage, and if you do this first, and there's not there's maybe not as much of that as there is in like Mega Man X, but that was definitely one of my inspirations. I like Mega Man.
You will also die about 1,000 times on each of those bosses, right?
Yeah, hopefully. If I did my job, yeah.
Definitely. And Duke, so you worked on the, so we talked about how you worked on A Light in the Fog previously. I know you probably can't say too much about it, but can you tell us anything just about what your experience of working on this was like, or any sort of particularly cool moments you had when you were working on the Scarlet Keys campaign?
I can tell you, I just had a delight being able to work on some of the writing and also work on some of the development of these scenarios and bring them to hopefully the level that we all wanted them to be. And that just it was so fun just tinkering with these things and getting to feel out the development process in a way that I couldn't as an intern. But like MJ's mentioned that I handed A Light in the Fog off, but I didn't get to see quite all the last bits, or I didn't get to work on them as a developer in the final stages. And this was real great to be able to work on these and be like, oh well, let's try this, or let's push this way. So
True. I almost feel like you had the opposite experience as you did with Light in the Fog, where um, this at the start of development on this campaign, it was Duke had not yet joined the Arkham team, so there were other developers, and we had like, all right, Jeremy's gonna make this scenario, and Aaron's gonna make these scenarios, and I'm gonna make these scenarios, and so on and so forth. And then when Duke joined, it's like, okay, finish these.
Mhm.
So Duke did a great job polishing, and in some cases, like kind of rebooting certain scenarios, which was really, really cool.
Yeah, there's definitely one scenario that I feel like I got to make truly my own.
Yeah.
And the rest, I kind of polished up to the level that we wanted them.
And you definitely like helped a lot with story writing. It's one
That
of the
was
reasons I was
just
really
fun.
excited to have you on the team. Is like, hey, dude,
Yeah.
can you write this, please?
Yeah, it was so fun to like really dig into these different locations, and
Hmm.
it gives such a variety. Like you get a real sense of variety in our world. Like hopefully you play this campaign and you're like, I want to go to this city, or I want to go see this place, or find out more about that area that we actually played in the game.
Yeah, that's. I mean, it sounds really cool. We're like extremely excited for this. So that very very excited to finally get our hands on it. Talking about the investigators a little bit. So before the campaign box, we've got like the investigator box with the new investigators and the new player cards. We got to reveal Daryl a little bit a few weeks ago, which was really really fun. And everyone, I mean, we're all excited about him. I think Dane basically started a cult around him. So there's been a lot of Daryl related excitement. I do have a question though. We always thought that survivors are these kind of like average Joes. They're like the thing is they're like the last person in the horror movie or whatever. But he's really good at investigating. He has 5 intellect. Is he still like what makes him a survivor specifically?
I would say what makes him a survivor is the fact that even though he is really good at investigating, he's not like prepared for this. He's just a man with a camera and like a dedicated spirit. He really wants to find the truth, but it's not like he's an established like occult expert or like a scientist, or he doesn't have anything that really screams seeker aside from he's good at investigating. And to me, the survivor class has always been the home for people with a weird niche. And so you've got survivors who are really good at combat. You've got survivors who are really good at evasion. You've got survivors who can actually do some magic. You've got Calvin, who's just whatever. So to me, Daryl is like one of those survivor characters that fills like an interesting niche. He is the high intellect survivor. Like he's the high intellect survivor. You know what I mean? And there's a few characters like that in every class. I think that are like there's the high combat seeker. There's the high combat rogue. There's the low combat guardian. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, there's always like the kind of the oddballs are sometimes like the most fun and interesting ones for sure.
Yeah. But thematically, I think it's basically just that like Daryl just do with the camera. That's why I love his weakness. Is just like, oh no, my film.
I dropped it in
Oh,
a
I dropped my
puddle.
film. Not in a puddle. Actually, it's less the puddle and it's more the daylight. I would think, but yes.
Yeah, just exposing that, but I mean, these days, it's all digital cameras, so people have forgotten about that. You can't like,
Yeah.
I guess you could drop an SD card into a puddle or something, and that would be like the modern equivalent or something like that. But speaking of Daryl and cameras, though, yeah, he's probably going to be carrying around several cameras, I would guess, and based on most of the decks people have been making. But we are curious because Daryl's announced he has this mechanic that's kind of based around evidence, like evidence tokens. And there's this card, Hawkeye Folding Camera, which is one of Dane's favorite cards, that is basically like the perfect card for Daryl, right? We're just curious about that. Like when Hawkeye Folding Camera was designed, like a few years ago, were you thinking ahead to like, oh man, one day Daryl's gonna be, or was it just kind of like a nice coincidence, or how did that evolve?
Definitely not. Sometimes we have like designs like banked where we're like, okay, we know this character is gonna do this or something adjacent to this. So when we design this card that we know should work really well with them, we want to make sure that it works really well with them. Other times, we design a card like Hawkeye Folding Camera, and then we're not even thinking about that character yet, right? all we know is like Daryl's probably going to use a camera. We don't know if he's going to come with his own camera. We don't know if he's going to use just like want to include this camera. The only thing I knew about Daryl at the time that we worked on Hawkeye was like we knew he was going to be the survivor seeker. Like that was kind of the plan from like the get-go.
His coming was foretold. People have been waiting for that combination for a long time.
Right, yeah. There's certain combinations that are just like, okay, we know that that's that character. We just have to wait for the opportune time, you know? And then when we were working on his ability, we were like, well, we want to make something that works well with Hawkeye folding camera. And we had a couple different, you know, ideas that we floated around. And eventually, I settled on this idea, and it just happens to neatly combo with Hawkeye folding camera, so it's great.
Wow.
You can have double cameras, and you know there might even be other evidence-based cards.
Yeah, I think a couple of them have been previewed, so we're excited to see how they work.
Yeah, I know
But
that
mainly,
one.
what I like about it is even if you don't use any of those cards, you can just use his Kodak and gather evidence that way, and it's fine. Like it's good.
He's got his 5 in. He's got his level 2 secret cards. Like he's pretty much all set. There's a lot of he's gonna be able to get the job done.
Yeah, which is important because like we're gonna have players who pick up a core set and this box, and they're not even gonna have access to Hawkeye folding camera and etc. So it needed to work just fine at the gate, and thankfully it does. So.
Yay! I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the other investigators coming in the Scarlet Keys, Kaimani. Similar to investigators before them, like Mateo and Parallel Roland, Kaimani has 5 bonus XP to start with. And one of the folks in Discord on the Night Train asked a question: what is the determining factor for giving some investigators 5 starting XP?
So we have different what we call suites of deck building options that as designers we like to keep consistent or symmetrical. So for example, the Dunwich characters all have the same suite, right? They are mono class with 5 flex spots. All of the characters from Edge of the Earth have the same suite. But a lot of times they're spread across many different products. So we have like the Finn archetype of low primary class level access, but unlimited access of like some trait, you know what I mean? And then like a bunch of flex spots for like 2 different classes. That's like one whole archetype. And there's multiple characters that fit that archetype. Like Marie is in that archetype.
Carolyn.
Yes, and Carolyn's also in that archetype. And we try to make it so that there's not more than one character of the same class that share that archetype. So ideally, and it's not like a rule, but like ideally we wouldn't have another mystic with 5 bonus experience, because that's Mateo's like niche, right? So working off of that assumption, there's going to be a 5 bonus experience rogue. And when we were working on Kaimani, I really like the idea of Kaimani having tool access, because there's so many different tools that a security expert could need and could have access to, and it just fits them so well. But you know, in playtesting we were like, it's not really a ton of cards, you know what I mean, even with the Scarlet Keys. So it's still mostly a mono class investigator. What can we give them that, like, you know, what else can we give them? And it was like, oh, 5 bonus experience. That's actually the same as Mateo, and it's the same as Parallel Roland. They have basically mono class investigators with very limited trait access outside of their class, like Blessed and Mateo and so on and so forth. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, totally. Is that something that I think one thing that I'd always heard about Mateo, like right when he'd come out, was that like, oh, that 5 experience was just tacked on because he's like a little weak compared to other like mystics or whatever. Is that something that is sort of like, you know what, you know, and I don't know how, but if we're not going to give him a 5, we're going to give him 5 XP. Or if you know, is that sort of a determining factor when you're first designing him? Like, let's do this as a 5 XP investigator. Like, you kind of already had that idea in mind?
He definitely didn't start with 5 XP, but I don't remember when in the process we added the 5 XP. I feel like it was early enough in the process that he was playtested with that like a lot. It wasn't like slapped on at the last minute. Not that we've never done that before, but but it also wasn't like, oh, Mateo's gonna be a 5 bonus XP character like right out the gate. It was definitely like something that got added during playtesting. Less because we were unimpressed with his front side, and more because we knew that the blessed access was pretty limited, especially at the time. Granted, Innsmouth changed a lot with
Sure
regards
did.
to that, but at the time it was like, yeah, oh cool, I have access to like these 4 cards, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
That don't even really synergize with him per se. But that's just it was mostly like a thematic consideration, you know?
Yeah, definitely. And
Yeah.
I think folks coming into the game now have sort of the benefit of, like, you know, Mateo back when he came out was such a different person, like, or an investigator, like you said, as opposed to now with full support of Innsmouth. That was like his glow up stage, right? So now,
Yeah.
like, he's got all this, like, access to all this powerful bless stuff. And as far as Kaimani goes, they have a whole back catalog of tools that have existed, some for a very long time. So, like, it's really fun to go and tinker with those things. What are your favorite things? If you were sort of starting up a campaign right now with Kaimani, what would you have them spend their 5 experience on starting out?
I would say it depends a lot on player count.
Okay,
I find
sure.
that it's a lot more important to have that diverse set of tools when you're solo, or even in 2-player, especially if
Yeah.
your other partner like can't investigate very well. It's really handy to have access to stuff like fingerprint kit and magnifying glass and stuff that can like boost their intellect and whatnot. I've also built Kaimani decks that don't take advantage of that at all and are just mono rogue, and it's fine because Kaimani has their own niche that sort of doesn't need any additional tools. In that you just evade a lot,
Sure.
and occasionally pull out a gun, but you know,
And a grappling hook.
and a grappling hook, yeah. Um,
MJ,
Duke
I
is
don't know
laughing because
why.
like Duke knows I'm like the one person I always put 25 auto in my Kaimani decks.
Oh
It's
yeah,
just fun.
totally.
Yeah, evade.
And I'm someone who
Um,
puts chainsaw in my Kamani deck.
That is funny.
You're not alone, dude.
Hold on,
You're
I
not
gotta be
alone.
really stealthy.
Yeah.
But yeah, mostly I use it personally. I've used it the most for like investigation tools.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
And
The
Duke,
occasional
I'm
land.
assuming. Oh, sure. Duke, I'm assuming that you're just going straight for chainsaws, no subtlety whatsoever.
Full
It
on
would be a
chainsaw.
chainsaw and a level 1 magnifying glass. That is what that
Perfect.
me.
To complement it, just kind of
I
sit
wanna-
it right up there.
I want to be
Yeah.
ready for anything, you know?
You
So,
have to-
go ahead, Ben.
A tool belt for your chainsaw.
yeah,
Yes.
use the tool belt to swap between them, and then you have that magnifying glass to really make sure that they've been properly chainsawed. You know.
Yeah.
I
Totally.
think something was chainsawed here. Interesting.
Or maybe you steal someone else's chainsaw and then stick it in your pocket.
There you go.
I do
Oh,
like
man.
that. So as far as the sort of 5 XP thing goes, have you ever considered using this as a way to taboo underused investigators, or just in general? Like, we feel like this needs a bump in a certain way.
So we try to avoid tabooing investigators as much as we can. We've done it, and we're going to continue to do it. And in fact, there's an investigator in FAQ 2.0 that's been tabooed. But anyway, I think when we do want to taboo something, we want to keep it in line with, like I was mentioning, the deck building suites, and I think we want to keep that like part of their identity. I don't know if I don't know. That's an interesting question. Like, would we ever go into like a survivor and just slap 5 bonus experience on them? Probably not.
It's a fair point. It would kind of make Mateo and Kimani feel less special, I guess, if you did that. So that's kind of reasonable.
It's less that, and it's more like we might already have a plan for those options in the future. So just kind of slapping that on an existing investigator might mess with those plans.
Sure.
Personally, I would rather save that for, let's say, like a parallel version of Frustrator. Like we did for Roland. Not that I'm confirming anything, but who knows?
Yeah. So Kimani is one of these investigators that is totally new to Arkham Files, right? Hasn't
Yes.
appeared in any of the previous games.
Correct.
But there's so for those investigators, or maybe I guess for Kimani and Amina in particular, did you start with kind of like a personality and a background and a story, and then kind of figure out how they'd fit into the game mechanics, or was it more the other way around?
It's been different, I would say, for almost every new investigator we've ever added. Sometimes we design an investigator specifically around a niche that we need filled. Sometimes we've just had a cool idea for an investigator and we have an open spot. You know what I mean? Amina was actually originally conceptualized back in the starter deck days. We knew that we wanted the starter decks to contain a mix of new characters and returning old characters. And Amina was one of those characters that we were like, hey, here's a new pitch for a new character. And we eventually went with Jacqueline instead, with the knowledge that maybe eventually Amina can make it into the game. So that's kind of how Amina started. Whether or not, like, what mechanically Amina was going to do was not really part of that discussion back then. You know what I mean? With Kaimani, it was a lot more like I had a specific idea for a niche that I wanted to fill in Rogue. I wanted to make basically what I wanted to do is I wanted to make an evasion focused character who actually does enemy removal. Because evasion doesn't do that. You know what I mean? Evasion is for ignoring enemies and they stay on the board. So it's kind of the opposite of Trish and like Wendy and Finn. I wanted to make a character who was like, no, this is an evasion heavy character, but they're actually like removing enemies from the board. So that was entirely the point from the get-go. And that's how Kaimani's entire story sort of came about. It was like, all right, what is this character doing? Conceptually in my head, it's always been that they're losing these tails. You know what I mean? They're not like knocking them out or something. Well, maybe they're like, but this is me putting someone in a headlock. I don't know. Yeah, exactly. I'm like, some people are gonna be listening to this and not see me. So yeah. Anyway.
I always kind of picture it like that trope in a movie where like the main character is like running away from somebody and they have like a hat or jacket on, and then like off screen you don't actually see it happen, but like, oh, the bad guys caught up to them and they turn them around and, oh, they gave their hat or jacket away to some random person or something like that.
One of our playtesters affectionately calls it tying their shoelaces together. Like, oh, I'm gonna evade this enemy and I'm gonna pull him back and I'm gonna tie their shoelaces together.
That works too. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So yeah, I encourage people to think of it that way.
Great. I was about to ask. I was like, what is actually happening when they do that?
It's whatever you want to theme it as in your head. Yeah. Yeah. Psychopath in chat is saying sleep. Sleep.
Exactly. Whatever works, right? As long as it gets the job done.
Exactly. And then as far as like their backstory, this is actually, believe it or not, this is the first investigator that I conceptualized and designed from the ground up.
Really?
Usually it's a team effort. We have various members in the Arkham Horror story team who contribute, and they'll pitch an idea and I'll pitch an idea, and then we'll kind of combine those two ideas or this, that, and the other thing. Like Winnie is actually 3 investigator pitches that we just combined. But with Kaimani, it was just, I want to make this character. This is the character I want to make. And it was just approved. And I was like, okay, great. I'm making this character. And that was it. Yes, that was a Dr. Orpheus reference, Walker of Tales.
That's awesome. Yeah, because as you said, like a lot of times you're working from a base of like an investigator that already exists in the Arkham Files universe, right? So like Charlie and Daryl have kind of been around for a while in that sense. Do you when you're kind of like introducing one of those characters to Arkham Horror the card game, how much are you trying to kind of like maintain continuity between their like mechanical identity between games, or is it more about just like if you can interpret who they are as a person differently in the rules? Because some of them like Rex always has something to do with being unlucky, right? Is usually his identity, but like it varies a lot between games and how it's implemented.
Right. Yeah. There's some characters whose ability translates like perfectly well from one campaign for one game line to another. And then there's some game lines that where it's like, yeah, this ability, there's no way to translate this. You know what I mean? A perfect example is like in Eldritch Horror and Arkham Horror, the board game, a big thing is closing gates. Like that is a huge element of the game, is closing gates. Go into the gate, close the gate. So there's a bunch of characters whose abilities are all revolving around gates. Luke Robinson, Akachi, like these are characters who all deal with gates in those games. And in this game, that's just not a thing. When it is a thing, it's a big plot point. It's not like a thing that just happens like every scenario. So their abilities just have to be like rethought, like from the ground up. But mostly we do want to keep their identities sort of the same. When you go from one game to the other, we want you to feel like you know these characters. If you've played Wendy Adams in this game, and then you go to this game and you play Wendy Adams, we want you to feel like, oh yeah, that's Wendy. It's not like a complete, this is completely different than their other appearance. But there are some characters where that's just the case. Like Calvin's a good example. Calvin doesn't do anything near his LCG version in any of the other games, and that's like totally because of the nature of those games, and so on and so forth.
Well, so it's great that you brought up Calvin, because Calvin is an example of kind of a special type of investigator that we talk about sometimes. Our own kind of weird name for this is like puzzle investigators. They're the ones that they usually have like lower stats, and they either have sort of unusual deck building, or they have like a mechanic that like compensates for having lower stats, but you really have to kind of focus your deck building around it. So like Calvin's one example, like Preston, Amanda, Lola to some extent. And we were very surprised and excited. It looks like there might be kind of 3 of those in this box, kind of depending on how you define it exactly. Like Carson, Charlie, and Amina, all kind of to some extent. Is this? Do you guys think of having a category of kind of like special, like kind of strange investigators like this, or to you are they kind of just like, they're more or less in a continuum with the other ones?
Yeah, I personally I call them, I don't call them like puzzles, but more like they're high skill ceiling investigators.
Ooh, I like that.
They're investigators with a high skill ceiling because it's like you can just pick up and play them, but some players are gonna pilot them better than others.
Lola, very high skill ceiling.
Yeah, like Lola's very high skill ceiling. But then there's some characters like Carson's got low stats, but I would not put him in the high skill ceiling bin. I would put him in the purely support bin, where it's like he's got low stats because he doesn't need them. Because he never. If you test once as Carson, like, not that you're doing it wrong, but like you just don't need to do that. Just everyone else test.
Really, why are you testing as Carson?
Although there is the. I almost shouldn't say this because I hate this, but there's the very common playtester deck of Sledgehammer Carson. Because when you get +5 to a test, you don't need good stats.
You can just bonk things,
which is very funny.
It continues the trend of the
former,
sorry,
the former SAS Carson, like, is very funny.
Continues the trend of very old people that can take Sledgehammer and run around with it, like Gloria. They have no business with the Sledgehammer.
I feel like in every Batman comic, eventually there's a part where Alfred like picks up an enormous machine gun and starts shooting people.
And you're like, wait, what? Alfred the badass?
If you even look in his character art, you'll see that we photoshopped out the sledgehammer that he's obviously holding.
But yeah, like Charlie's definitely like a high skill ceiling character,
So of these like high skill ceiling investigators, I have 2 questions. Do you have a favorite of the existing ones, or one that you think sort of came out the best? And just in general, are they like harder to design and balance, and what does it take to make one that works well?
Ooh, that's tough. Do you have a favorite, Duke?
They're all so unique. Like
Yeah.
I've enjoyed playing all of them, so it's really a little cruel, y'all, to ask us for our favorites. But
I'm
I think
firmly Team Amanda personally, but that's just me.
well, Amanda's just good. Like Amanda's just really
That's why I
good.
like her.
I think my favorite might be Charlie. But that's also just because he's the most recent, and that's always my answer. Um, I like Calvin a lot. I love Calvin because when Calvin first came out, he was panned, and now everyone's like, no, Calvin's good. And I'm
I
like,
mean,
yeah,
I think
yeah,
the
no,
Calvin
Calvin.
article was released on like April 1st, and we're like, this must be a joke. But now I'm Team
Zeros
Calvin.
in all stats.
So
I definitely I don't think I would put Amina in that category either, for that matter.
Hmm.
Amina,
the
Amina's actually pretty. Like there is a skill ceiling there with like playing with Doom and like knowing when to put Doom on and when to, but like as far as deck construction and as far as like I don't know, like play the cards that do good things with Doom and then play the cards that remove Doom, and play the cards that use your other stats. You're good. That's Amina. You did it.
I'll always be Moonlight ritualing, right? And things will work out.
I mean,
Yeah.
you know,
Well,
based on the cards that are coming out, you may not even have to
Ooh.
run that. Like
I mean, we
all
we,
of those
excited.
big all of those hand slot charms that we've revealed, they all have some way of self-clearing Doom, which is huge. So as long as you're managing those abilities effectively, yeah, you don't need willpower. Like
hmm.
Can I
Yeah,
ask,
that's definitely
so
really exciting.
one of the things about this box was that um, generally when a cycle of new investigators comes out, I would be like sort of just naturally pressed to be like, okay, this is the fighter, this is the typical seeker, this is the typical, you know, hybrid person who can do both. And that's generally like any rogue or any mystic, right? But like
Mhm.
in this pack, and I think we've seen it before, the first time I think was in the Circle Undone, where Carolyn was the
Yeah.
guardian, and I was like, what?
And Joe Diamond was the seeker.
Yeah. And then again in Dreamlands, where
Meters, yeah.
G meters, yeah. With Tony being the oh look, that's the 5, you know, combat person, right? So that's the person in it. Where do you sort of stand in like which one we should be using for like combat, or are they all meant to be sort of like flexible and kind of doing their own things in this?
It's kind of how you build them. And by kind of I mean completely. I think any character, I think there's a few characters who you build them the way that they're meant to be built, right?
Sledgehammer Carson.
Rex Murphy, you investigate. If you're not investigating with Rex Murphy, you're Rex Murphying wrong. Tony's gonna shoot things and gain money. But then there's a lot of characters. I would say like most characters fall under this huge umbrella of build them the way that you want to play them. If you want to play Charlie as purely combat, you can do that. Just slap a lot of combat allies in your deck, and you're gonna be good at combat. If you're Charlie Kane and you've got 2 beat cops and Delilah out, you're gonna be good at combat.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And likewise with Amina, the cards that she puts in her hand slots are gonna make a big difference as to what she's good at doing. So I think most characters can be sort of built to occupy whatever niche you want, slash flex spot if that's what you want them to do. Um, just kind of how I like it.
Yeah, I think diversity in like how you can build for these characters is key to just you can find new sides of them, especially as new cards come out.
Yeah, that's the thing that I'm the most excited about. You know, a character comes out, you're like, oh, okay, I get this character. They do this. And then 2 sets later, you're like, oh, wait a second. They don't have to do that. They could do this, you know?
Mm.
I'm excited for some of the new deck build opportunities for old investigators that Scarlet Keys is going to bring to the table. There's a lot of really cool stuff.
Speaking of new cards, we do have a card that we were given to us by FFG to reveal tonight. So why don't we'll give your voice we'll give your voice a break for a moment, and we'll talk about this new card, which is somewhere at the bottom of my slideshow. Here it is. So so we have a card called Friends in Low Places. It
I know
is.
that girl.
We talked about the art a little bit already. Features Niobe and a man with scars and a mustache. But so this is a rogue event. Cost 0, has a intellect and an agility icon on it. It's a favor, and it is a customizable card, which we haven't talked about on the cast yet, but we will momentarily. But it's customizable. When you purchase Friend in Low Places, choose and record a trait on its upgrade sheet. Look at the top 6 cards of your deck. For each looked at card with the chosen traits, you may spend 1 resource to add that card to your hand. Shuffle the remaining cards into your deck. It does say Mrs. The quote does say, "Pleasure doing business with you, Mrs. O'Ban."
I thought it was really funny when everyone's like, "Is that Naomi?" And I'm like, oh, "They haven't seen the flavor yet."
I'm sure I looked at that and realized that at some point and then forgot. All right. So, we'll talk about the rules for customizable in a second, but the actual customable upgrade sheet. So I guess generally what it is it's a set of traits that you can spend experience to add extra functions to the card. So this one, and I think there's a bunch of these that have been revealed already. There's like 10 or so that have been shown, I think. But this one has a spot to write down your chosen trait, and then if you spend 1 experience, you can add the helpful trait, which is when you play Friends in Low Places, you may choose another investigate your location and resolve its effects. If you spend 2 experience, you can add versatile, not the card versatile, but the trait versatile, which lets you pick another trait. When you play Friends in Low Places, you may choose one of the looked at cards with both chosen traits to add to your hand without spending 1 resource. I'm not sure. I think that replaces the base effect, right? Or is that a second card?
It doesn't replace it, it's in addition to.
Oh, okay.
So what's cool is like you can use it to spread out your traits. Like, oh, I want items and tricks. You know what I mean? Or if you really want to double down on something, you could take like item, weapon, and then any weapon's gonna also have the item trait. So when you pull them, you can just like, oh, I can add 1 to my hand without spending a resource.
Nice. Yeah. It's always good to draw more cards. So, and then you can add bolstering for 2 experience. Each card added to your hand by Friends in Low Places gains a wild icon until the end of the phase. Clever's 2 experience. Instead of shuffling the remaining cards in your deck, you may place them each on the top of your deck in any order. Ooh.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, I read this card many weeks ago when it was sent to us, and now I'm re-experiencing it with everybody.
You think you're re-experiencing it? I haven't seen this card in like 6 months.
So then
that's what it does.
another 2 experience you can give it prompt, which is Friends in Low Places gains fast and play during any fast trigger window. 3 experience, you can make it experienced. Increase the number of cards looked at by 3, so make it so you can look at 9 cards. And finally, 3 experience, you can make it swift. You may play one of the cards added to your hand, paying its cost. So, I mean, the big deal with these customizable cards is you can't actually get all of these, right? There's a cap of, I think, 10 experience.
Yeah.
But it does affect all copies in your deck. So you might spend 10 experience on it, but that's really upgrading 2 cards. So you still have to make decisions on like what stuff you want to do. Do you actually want to invest how much experience into the card, and like what combinations can you play off of it? And it opens up a lot of space here depending on what combos you go for, right?
Yeah, what's cool about this card that we really tried to do as much as possible is open it up to whatever you want this card to do. If you are using this card to pull out your best gun, all right, maybe slap like versatile so that you can get it for free, and or swift or prompt or both so that you can do it as fast as possible. Or are you using this card? Are you Winnie and you're just trying to grab as many skill cards as you can? Well, maybe you want the bolstering one, and the experience so that you can search the top 9, so you can just add as many as you want to your hand. If you've got like, if you're the kind of Winnie player who's got a 20 skill deck, like me, it's really nice to be able to like, oh, I've got 5 resources. I'm just gonna search the top 9 cards and add like 5 skills to my hand. They all have a bonus wild. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Or if you're playing a support rogue, which is becoming a thing, you can definitely like take helpful, take versatile, and just try to spread out the traits so that like, oh, I'm gonna grab like item and spell. That's gonna help everyone in my party. You know what I mean? There's so many different things you can do with this card.
Yeah, just looking at the upgrade sheet, you kind of start to get ideas of like how different decks could use it. That is really neat.
Yeah.
I did notice
It's
this was
cool.
I did notice this one was carefully labeled "look at" instead of "search,"
Yeah.
which means
Yeah,
I guess
that's the one thing missing is Mandy synergy. Really,
I'm trying to remember. I think it started as a search effect, and it mostly it wasn't that it was too powerful with Mandy so much as it was just very confusing because the way that this card works, it's already interacting with every single card that you look at in some way, because it's for
Right.
each card that you look at with a chosen trait, you can spend a resource. So it's like, how does this work with Mandy? And at a certain point, I just went, it says look at. Like no, just forget about it.
that's fair. Yeah, because Mandy's ability, the rules are kind of complicated. I think so.
Right.
That seems pretty reasonable.
I think it's best to keep search effects limited to, search the top number cards of your deck to do this one thing with that card. That makes it easy in the future. Not that we're not gonna do weird stuff, because we're always gonna do weird stuff.
Oh yeah,
Always.
you always gotta leave open the possibility of weird stuff. That's what
Yeah.
makes things. Yeah.
My favorite search card in the game is the what is it? The Codex, the Otherworldly Codex. That's like search the top 9 cards of the encounter deck for a card. If there's another card matching it in play, you discard both of them or something. I love that.
Yeah, fantastic card too.
That one is really
Oh, yeah.
special.
That one's cool.
So getting back to just sort of customizable is this new mechanic that's really interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about just sort of where this idea came from for customizable, or sort of how this evolved as you were working on it?
Oh gosh, how did this come about? So honestly, I think what happened was I just decided to go ham. And I was like, I just want to make a bunch of weird cards. I just want to make a bunch of cards that do a bunch of different things and you can customize them. And as I was thinking about it more and more, I was thinking about like, oh, how would that even work? We'd have to have like a separate sheet of different options that you can check off. And then like 10 minutes later, I was designing them. You know what I mean? And that's usually how things go for me. It's like if I can't stop thinking about it so much so that I'm like working on a weekend, then it's obviously a good idea. Has been my experience at least. They're not going to be for everyone, but there's also not a ton of them. So if you don't like them, that's fine. Don't play them, or play the level 0 version. They're all playable. They're all fine as level 0 cards. If you just ignore the word customizable, they're fine. None of them are bad. Well, except for maybe like the Ravenquill, and like.
Well, in this one,
and like the Servitor and the Ravenquill, it's like you kind of need to start upgrading them to do something.
In this one, Friends in Low Places, you kind of have to customize it, at least in the sense of picking a trait. But that's
yes, yeah. But you could just leave it at that. But what I love about them is each one of these cards is such a huge talking point and such a huge decision point. We're going to be examining these cards for years. We're going to be going back to Runic Axe 5 years from now and being like, ooh, with this new investigator, I can do this and this. If I take these 2 upgrades, it's so good. You know what I mean?
I think when I first heard about it, or when we were first talking about it, I was kind of confused because I was thinking like, how is this different from just having different upgraded versions? Like we've seen cards before where there's like different upgrade paths, like emergency cash. But I think you look at something like Friends in Low Places, things like picking what trait would how that would work, and just the sheer number of combinations of how you can upgrade it. Like those are things that you couldn't really do without printing like 80 different versions of know a card.
Exactly. There was actually a moment I remember during development in which I was like, would it be possible or plausible for me to make a PDF, like a downloadable PDF that has every combination of upgrades for every one of these cards? And I started doing it, and then I went, no, there's no way. Oh my god, that'd be so much work. Because each one of these has so many different combinations, and you can treat them at every level. And I'm sure someone will do it. I do not envy that. But like, there's so many different options. Yeah, it's really, it would not be viable to do with just upgrades, with just like separate cards.
Yeah, I think the really cool thing for me about customizable, like when it came out, it just made so much sense because the game is sort of at this large state, right? There's so many different campaigns and cards available that this is just sort of like, oh, naturally some of these cards like can do really really well in specific campaigns, right? Like I've always known Dunwich to be really low experience giving generally, so like these cards, I like that they shine in any environment. Like you can customize them to just, you know, be a little bit of experience and get, you know, that extra oomph of you know, health or sanity or whatever you're looking for Dunwich specifically. And then if you're in Forgotten Age where you might have so much experience you just don't know what to do with it, you can just have this you could just get in scenario 7 or whatever two of the servitor friends that I love to call Jabberwockies to help you out and hang out with you, and they're just like, they're maxed out. They can do all of your commands at, you know, right from the get-go. I love that it fills that certain like XP sink spot as well as being really efficient tiny experience cards.
Yeah, that's actually one of my favorite things about them, is that if you're the kind of person who struggles with like, oh, what do I do with these 4 experience points? Just throw them in your customizable cards. It's not gonna be a waste at all. They're all good.
Totally.
Or even if you just have like 1 spare experience, you know?
Well, then you
Yes.
get a magnifying glass level 1, right? But no.
Yeah,
So,
fair.
That's always what you do. You can take it.
so, so besides customizable, another new, not a new mechanic, but a new kind of theme on the player cards in this cycle is there's a lot of cards, especially mystic cards, that deal with Doom and putting Doom on player cards. So we talked about the hand slot items a little while ago. This is definitely something where it feels like it's getting kind of a lot spicier than the initial couple rounds of cards like Arcane Initiate or something like that would have Doom on them. How has this kind of like evolved over time? Like where it seems like do you feel like you have enough of a handle on it now that you can like take bigger risks with printing cards that put a bunch of Doom all over the place?
Yeah, I think so. When the game first came out, I mean, keeping in mind that like all of Dunwich and Curse of the Rougarou and Carnival of Horrors were done before the core set even came out. So for the first like year of the game, we had no idea. We were flying blind. We had no idea how any of these cards were going to get received, what cards are going to be good, what cards are going to be bad, etc. And Doom was one of those things. We played around with it with Marie, obviously, but it was still very limited. It was like, oh, you slap 1 Doom on a card, and then you get your bonus, and then you kind of leave it there, and then maybe you get rid of it when it gets close to the agenda. And the more cards we printed that manipulated with Doom, the more we saw that the reaction was, oh, I don't want to play this card, it's too scary, I'm scared, you know what I mean? And so we were like, okay. Slowly over time, we learned these play patterns, and now we can start designing cards that play around with Doom more in a way that's fair and feels powerful, and like worth it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean that is something that I think we hear from players when we're talking to them a lot, is people are just like, I'm way too scared to play cards that put Doom on things. but it sounds like maybe some of these new cards will kind of change that perception a little bit.
Yeah, and I mean the thing to remember about Doom too is it's very scenario dependent. And if you go back and you think about your past games and you think like, what percentage of my games do I lose because of Doom? And what percentage do I lose because I'm defeated, or I get pinned by an enemy and I can't escape, or I can't investigate this location, or whatever. And if the answer is like, I actually only lose to Doom like 10% of the time, then maybe Doom's not that scary, and you should put more Doom tech in your deck. Uh, that rhymed.
Hey.
And it'll make you play faster because those cards are powerful. Theoretically, right?
Yeah.
We're big David Renfield fans on this cast. We're
Yeah, I mean,
evangelists for Mr. David Renfield.
Renfield's
Yeah.
Renfield's a bit too good.
Renfield's a big fan of David Renfield.
Renfield might get tabooed.
Uh-oh.
No!
Renfield
Dan-
might get tabooed like
Dan, you broke the rule. You're not supposed to mention
Tomorrow.
any card you actually like when we interview MJ.
I'm gonna lose sleep worrying about this. That's
Thank you.
terrifying.
womp womp. But also, he deserves it.
Oof,
Yeah.
maybe.
Mostly because of all of these new cards that are coming out.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. Everybody listening, if you haven't tried playing David Renfield, get in now.
Yeah, get in
now.
before the nerf
No,
comes,
no,
you know?
honestly, play him however you want
Oh, yeah,
because that's
yeah.
the cool thing about the taboo list.
Yeah, there you go.
Sure.
Yeah,
I
you
think-
can break taboo.
The coolest
Absolutely.
thing about like Doom for me, and seeing it kind of have this big resurgent with all of these like interesting cards that handle Doom, not just in put it on then remove it sort of a thing, right? You're doing like you're pushing it to a card, then it's getting removed, or you're like
Mhm.
kind of housing it somewhere where it's being ignored. Is that Doom has always felt like the ultimate, like if we're thinking about the elements for a minute, and like Avatar: The Last Airbender or whatever, it's always been the fire, right? Like you're playing with fire,
Mhm.
and if you use it even slightly remotely wrong, then you're gonna get burned, and you know your team's gonna doom out or whatever. And
Yeah.
like this, I'm excited to use because we didn't have much other than like throw water on it, like. And
Right.
now we have all these different ways of like, this is how you manipulate it. So I'm really excited to see that and that personality come out of Amina too.
Yeah, one of the things I've been really enjoying about these new Doom cards is they interact with different mystics in different ways. Like, if you're Marie, you want to keep one card with Doom in play if you can. So that changes kind of the way that you play some of these cards. If you slap one of these cards in Marie, let's say you throw a Dowsing Rod in Marie because she's got 4 intellect. Now she's investigating with like a 5 base intellect, and you can boost it to even higher if you put a Doom on the Dowsing Rod. That combos immediately with her ability. But now you almost don't want to clear the Dowsing Rod because you want to keep that Doom in play. That's different from, let's say, Dexter. Dexter, who, by the way, I consider to be a Doom investigator because you can immediately just swap out any of his cards that have Doom on them
Yeah.
and play something else. All of these cards interact with Dexter in a completely different way. With Dexter, you want to pile the Doom on as much as possible, and then at the last second, you're just like, and it's gone.
Dexter,
Yeah.
David Renfield's best friend, up until the moment when suddenly they're not friends anymore. But
Yeah.
until then,
It was a cigarette case the whole time.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I pulled it's this, like sleight of hand, and this Dowsing Rod was actually Leo DeLuca.
Exactly. Abracadabra.
Yeah, abracadabra, and everyone's like, "What?" It's actually a cat.
Always
So,
will.
so what are the other new mechanics that we've seen a couple cards for? Is this dilemma mechanic? And I think we actually previewed one of them a couple weeks back, but it's a revelation effect on player cards, which I don't think we've seen before, at least not ones that you actually draw from your player deck.
Yep, only on
Uh,
weaknesses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess where'd my question go? Yeah, so this is like kind of an old concept that was like part of the encounter deck before, weaknesses, and now it's being reapplied in a new way. Where do like ideas like this kind of stem from, I guess?
So it's funny actually. A lot of the original dilemma effects started. We actually play tested them in, was it Edge of the Earth?
Innsmouth.
Innsmouth. Yeah, it was
Oh.
all the way back in Innsmouth. I remember because Duke was, yeah. So
Yeah.
all the way back in Innsmouth, we had these dilemma cards, and we pushed them back. And I remember we started putting them at Edge of the Earth, but then we pushed them back again. And the reason we kept pushing them is because we wanted to get them right.
Hmm.
And also because like Innsmouth already had enough going on. You know what I mean? With like bless and curse and all that stuff. So the idea behind these cards was we want these cards to be talking points when they come up. We want it to be like a whole discussion between you and your whole crew. Or if you're only playing by yourself, like it's just an interesting thing that you have to think about. It's like a little puzzle. Which of these piles do I pick with Heed the Dream? Which of these options do we choose with Predator or Prey? There's a lot of situational things that can come up, and based on like what cards come off the top of the deck with Heed the Dream, there's so many different things that could happen. So it was like, okay, these can't just be events that you play. Because if they're events that you just play whenever you want to, there's really no interesting decision point. You're going to play it at the optimal time, right? You're going to play Predator or Prey when you immediately at the time that you want to do one of those options.
Mhm.
And then it's not even going to be a discussion. It's just going to be like, top option, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
we do it. So the fact that there are revelation abilities is crucial, because that's what makes it like, you don't have a choice. If one of these cards comes up off the top of the deck, you're doing it. And you have to immediately decide one of those options. There's no middle ground. So for Predator or Prey, if you don't want to move and you don't want enemies to move, sucks. Like you got to do it. But every now and then you get that cool experience where it's like, ooh, interesting. We can either use this card to get our squishy seeker away from that enemy, or to get the enemy to come to Zoe so that she can stab it. Like, oh, interesting choice, you know? And that's what I love about them.
It reminds
Yeah.
me a little bit of the research cards from Dream Eaters, but it
Yeah.
like a kind of like a draw version of that instead of a search version.
Yeah. Yeah, and like obviously the plus side is you don't have to play them. They don't have a cost, they don't have an action to take. But the downside is sometimes they screw you. It just happens. Sometimes you pull Heed the Dream, and every good card is paired with a weakness. You know what I mean? And you're like, oh, come on.
I mean, I like the theme of them, that it's like a hard choice, which does feel very Survivory.
Yeah.
Where you could be stuck between a rock and a hard place, or maybe you get lucky and get to sprint up the stairs away from the snakes or whatever. But
Yeah, occasionally you get lucky, right? Which was the card that you previewed?
we did Predator or Prey.
Okay, yeah. So occasionally you get lucky, or even occasionally you include Predator or Prey in a deck where you're always going to be doing one of those two options, and then that's cool. That's smart deck building, you know?
Yeah.
We want
Yeah.
to reward you for thinking about that.
Yeah, I think when we were previewing this, I sort of like made a deck that was like a Tommy deck that was like shoot things in the next room
Oh, nice.
centric.
Yeah,
So like you can
I love
kind of
that.
push them or pull them to where
Yeah,
they need
Sniper
to
Tommy.
be. Do that, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah,
And
this is
I
great
think
for Sniper Tommy.
I think the neat thing about these is it seems like anyway they were balanced. They're pretty powerful effects. If you were to just be able to play this for like 0 or 1 or whatever amount of resources, they're pretty singularly powerful effects, right? So one of the interesting things for me that I wanted to know was if you saw the potential for these dilemma cards and was like, oh, remember that powerful like iteration of this last card that we had? What if we tacked that onto a dilemma and that was half of the dilemma? Has that ever been something that came into like consideration when you were designing these, or
Say that again?
like if it
I
was
missed
something?
the...
Yeah, if so, these cards are generally like I would say that one of these effects in the dilemma is more powerful than just like if you were to have this on a card by itself.
Right. Yes.
And I'm guessing that is sort of evened out by the fact that you can't just play it. Is there a card that you were designing like previously that had like an iteration that you were excited to include on a dilemma card, where it was like maybe
I
a little
see.
bit too powerful, and you were like, "Ooh, I want to pull that into a dilemma card."
Not specifically, but I will say that there are some dilemma cards we haven't revealed yet that have effects that are like, I don't think I would put that on a card normally, just because it's so strong when you can choose when to play it. So yeah, I don't think there are any like past cards where I'm like, oh, this is a design that I scrapped and now I'm gonna slap it into a dilemma. But there were definitely cards that when we were designing the dilemmas, we were like, oh yeah, that's fun. We should put that on there because we're not gonna do that normally. You know what I mean?
Sure, totally.
Yeah.
When it comes to so these are really interesting new mechanics that are on some of these new cards. You know, when it comes to cards that have either like, you know, unique mechanics or sort of a lot of rules text or like a customizable card with a bunch of upgrades, I mean, I know that you guys must worry about sort of just the sheer amount of like rules text that's on the board at any given time and just sort of interpreting everything. Do you have any kind of like internal limits for how complex you can go with the rules on a card, or how do you manage to like design cards that are fun without having the rule situation just get like too difficult for players to manage?
Yeah, that's tough. So it kind of it depends a lot on the card type. Um, Generally speaking, cards that leave play can be more complicated because they're going to do their thing and then they're going to leave. So if an event has a pile of text on it, obviously we don't love that, but if it's like necessary to get that effect across, I'm a bit more easy. I'm a bit more. That's a bit more palatable than when it's on like an asset. Um, and then some card types have like a lot of like front-loaded rules, like overhead, like enemies, for example. There's a lot already. You don't even need text on an enemy for them to be like mentally taxing, right? Just their fight, health, and evade and damage values are sometimes enough. So when we design an enemy, sometimes all they need is like 2 lines of text and they're good, or a keyword. So obviously there have been many enemies that have way more text than that. But in general, like we try to keep that a little lower and front load it more on like treacheries and stuff that's gonna like leave play. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Um,
definitely, because then it's like
yeah.
it's gone immediately, and then like something happened, but you don't need to keep checking back at what it does every time something happens.
Yeah, but that's also just something that we decide in playtesting, right? If a card is in development and it's a problem because a lot of people are like, "Oh man, this card is just tough to remember. This effect is global effects are like that. If there's a card, even if it's 1 line of text, a global effect that's just like all enemies get +1 fight
Yeah,
can be really difficult to remember. So it kind of just depends on a number of factors, you know? It's not always amount of words. Because sometimes a card effect can be an entire paragraph, but it's actually really intuitive,
oh yeah,
and you kind of just get it. Like, it needs that many words for it to work in the rules, but you read it and you're like, okay, yeah, I get it. Like First Watch is a good example, I would say, of a card that's like that. It's like, when you're reading the card, it's like 6 lines of text, so oh my god, it's so much text. But when you conceptualize, it's just, oh, you just do the Mythos phase, but you can pick where the cards go. Done. If I could have written that, I would have written that.
I feel like you
Yeah.
guys also have pretty cleverly avoided some of the like types of cards in other games that introduce the weirdest rules things. Like, there's no cards in Arkham that are like every card on the field is now a tool or something like that, right? Like,
Yeah.
'cause those just lead to the nightmare zone.
I mean, I designed Time Warp, so I shouldn't, you know.
But that's an event. You play it and then it goes away.
Yeah,
right?
it's true.
Well, sort of.
But yeah, I would say, in general, the scenarios are complicated enough that we don't need to add to that. We can avoid it.
Definitely. I think I think that so that was that's pretty much the stuff that we wanted to ask you guys about, but we do have if you guys have time, we have some questions from fans in the chat that we'd like to ask you guys. I think we might do kind of like a lightning round on this. We might do kind of like a 1 minute on each question just to keep it manageable, if that sounds good.
Sure. Yeah, I'm down.
Cool.
Duke, you good?
And
Yeah.
if it's a question you can't answer, just say that you have to consult with George Barnaby before and get back to
Okay,
us.
yeah.
Yeah, or just or make it spooky, like the time is not yet nigh or something like
Okay. The planets
yeah.
have not aligned. Yeah.
And I should say thanks to Harrison for watching the chat and collecting these. That's really good. Cool. So do we have kind of like a timer? Okay, Ben's got a timer going.
I got
Oh,
it.
you actually do a timer. Oh shit. Okay.
Wow. Oh yeah, it's
on the
real. It's
clock.
on.
Let's do
So,
it.
question from Comrade Sim: were traits like spirit, tactics, tools, etc., thought up with plans to make them matter to certain investigators, or was it more theme first and then making investigators care about them? Then you could make cards with that in mind later.
Back in the core set days, it was definitely a theme thing. We kind of mapped out like, these are the traits that we think are going to be in the game. We've since added to it, but these are the traits that we think are going to be in the game. We didn't really go into the deep how many cards of each trait are going to exist and what investigators are going to use what. That was definitely like more of a later development sort of thing, which is why you see a lot of the early investigators didn't care about traits.
Yeah, like some investigators do and some don't.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's go on to the next one. We reset the timer. What is your favorite part about designing campaigns with the new format? I guess meaning like the all-in-one box format, and also maybe what is your least favorite part? And this is from Dan A from Discord, I think.
Oh God. Okay, so my favorite part, and I want to leave time for Duke to answer this too. My favorite part is that we can do things that we weren't able to do before with linearity, with just the box format, like the map, for example. That's in Scarlet Keys, we would never have been able to do that before. And then my least favorite thing, it's writing the story with all of those factors is really hard.
It's alleviated
Yeah.
restrictions from you that
Yeah,
you go crazy, right?
It's really easy to write a linear story that goes from chapter 1 to chapter 2 because you know that they read chapter 1 before they started
Yeah.
chapter 2.
Duke, how about you? Because you worked both a little bit in the old system and in the new system, right?
Yeah, and from my understanding of the old system, like the new system allows for so much more possibility, so many cool new things that we can explore and do with this format, things that haven't been done in games or like in physical card games before.
Yeah.
And it feels really limitless. But yeah, I would also echo what Maxine said in that it's daunting. It adds another layer of daunting requirement to what you're doing as well.
Like writing a choose your own, not even writing a choose your own adventure novel, because the things happen in order there. It's just that you can branch. This is more like, who knows what's going on.
There was so many times in Scarlet Keys where we were like, oh, we have to revise this dialogue because they might not know this yet, because they might not have traveled to this location yet. Oh, dang. You know what I mean?
Totally. Let's see. So we got another question. This one's a little vague, but let's see where it goes. On the Night Train asks, any new tokens?
No new tokens in Scarlet Keys.
Okay, yeah. So kind of like the frost tokens or the little seal things in Edge of the Earth. So none of those in Scarlet Keys.
Not in Scarlet Keys. There are new mini cards.
That's pretty good.
I think I saw in the box there was like 40 mini cards or something. I was like, oh,
what
no.
are those about? Weird.
Ooh. Wow, that's a fun thing for people to speculate about in the remaining weeks before we get our hands on it.
I'm
okay,
sure we'll
next
know more later.
Next question. Okay, this one I again vague. We'll see how it's interpreted. Can you talk about La Chica Roja from Sleben777?
I mean, I can, but like, what do you want to know? La Chica Roja is definitely like one of my favorite characters in the Scarlet Keys. I don't want to say too much because I kind of just want players to discover her on their own. But she's a lot of fun. She's probably my favorite character to write dialogue for. I will say that. I will say that. Yeah, you can tell when you read La Chica Roja's dialogue that it's like, yeah, MJ had a lot of fun.
So that's our takeaway
so cool.
is prepare yourself for La Chica Roja.
She's so cool. I just want to be her.
Very cool. Let's see. Okay, so another question from Comrade Sim. How much changed between organizing cards for specific packs versus the new box format? I guess that's maybe about like player cards, but it could also be like encounter cards, maybe?
Well, obviously player cards, yeah, there's a big, like, we used to have to divvy up the player cards between the different boxes, and that was a whole thing, and we'd have to really think hard about it and figure out what cards work in which box. Now we just don't do that, and that's so much easier. It also is great for encounter cards because it means before we had to keep every pack had 60 cards, right? So generally speaking, every scenario was between 30 and 40 cards. It just had to be, or like maybe 42 cards at the most, or sometimes less. Sometimes it's like 28 cards, whatever. Now we can just do whatever we want. I think there's a scenario in the Scarlet Keys that's like 15 cards. We can just do that. That's awesome. We were never able to do that before. And we likewise we could make a scenario that's like 80 cards. There isn't, but like, theoretically we could.
You could if you wanted to.
Yeah, it's just really. It's just really exciting that we have that openness. Yeah.
That is really cool. Okay, so this one I don't see who asked it, so sorry about that. But this will be like an anonymous question. Did you know Bless and Curse tokens are going to be released when Mateo came out, or maybe I mean you designed stuff like a year and a half in advance or something like that. So maybe it should be like when you were designing Mateo, did you know Bless and Curse tokens were coming in the future?
I should clarify real quick. The scenario that's 15 cards is just the scenario itself, and then there's also encounter sets. It's not.
Okay.
Oh.
As for Mateo, yeah, no, I had a plan for Bless and Curse tokens to exist,
Mhm.
but I didn't know what they did yet, and I didn't know when they were going to appear. It was more just like at some point I want to add more Chaos tokens. That was like what I had in my head. And I knew that I wanted it to be Bless and Curse tokens because that's such a like big thing in the old Arkham games is like Blessed Dice and Cursed Dice.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, we didn't have a specific plan that they were going to show up, in a specific cycle a certain number of years from now, and know what they were going to do, and know that there was going to be cards that synergize with them that have the plus trait, and no, none of that was set in stone.
Mm. So this next one is interesting. You might not be able to say much about it, but I'm definitely curious. I think this is from earlier. You mentioned, that the new pack has to work in isolation with just the core set, even for people that aren't huge nerds like us that have bought all the previous stuff. So does FFG have stats about like how many players are kind of like core set and then they just pick up the newest expansion versus how many people are like just playing the core set and nothing else versus how many people are like fully committed, buy everything as soon as it comes out? Like, do you guys have numbers, and does that affect sort of your planning?
We don't have specific numbers about like itemized lists like that, like, oh, this many people picked up these two products at such and such date. We don't have anything that specific. What we do have broadly are just sales numbers. And we do know just by looking at the sales numbers that the core set outsells everything by a huge factor. So we can like theorize from that there's a lot of players out there who just have the core set. That's all they have. Or maybe they have the core set in one cycle. I would say just looking at the numbers, the percentage of players who have every single product is pretty low. So while we do want to make sure that those players are highly entertained, because they're like the players who are they're the lifeblood of the game, we also we're also very much aware that I think a strong majority of players only have like maybe one cycle, two cycles, none even. So we want to make sure that those players are incentivized to pick up, even if they can just skip ahead, that's fine. Otherwise they feel like it's daunting, right? It's like, oh
Yeah, like
in order
it's
to
like
level Scarlet Keys, I have to pick up these 8 cycles. I'm not going to do that.
like the cost of entry is like too high.
Exactly.
I should say that question was from a psychopath from the chat. This one's interesting. What is your headcanon for why Kaimani works really well with Lola Santiago and Jean, two allies they would probably hate in canon? Or Jean, I guess
is that
Janae
Janae?
Beauregard? Yeah,
Janae,
sorry,
yeah.
without the
Janae.
accent, it's hard to.
So I've always pictured it as one of two things. Either Kaimani is putting on the front, right? Kaimani is because basically this is Kaimani's like what's the word? Secret identity almost, right? Yeah. This is their cover story. Their cover story is that they do this. And as part of that, yeah, they probably do interact with people like Lola, Janae. They might even come to admire those people for their own reasons. Another possible theory is maybe those characters are in on it too. Maybe Kaimani's basically gone to Lola and been like Lola Santiago and been like, hey, I think we should, I think we should relinquish these artifacts back to their original owners. And maybe Lola's like, yeah, I'll help you with that. You know what I mean? Like an inside, the inside girl, like undercover. So yeah, I've always felt with Arkham, I'm going past the minute probably, but I've always felt with Arkham that when you include a card in a deck, that is you thinking of, you can think of your headcanon for how that card came about in that deck, right? If you put a police badge in Skids, how did Skids get the police badge? My headcanon is he stole it, naturally.
Heck yeah.
But maybe your headcanon is he's actually friends with one of the officers who was like nice to him or something.
Or he was an undercover cop the whole time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. you can kind of it's like character creation, except with a lot of the lines filled in already. You are Skids O'Toole, but like, how did you get these cards? That's up to you. You know.
Absolutely. Just
Yeah.
just a couple more of these left. So here's one from Perford and Harrison. Are we getting a Seeker side quest? That might be
Yes.
one. That might be one that we can't get a yes or
Need
no
to-
answer to.
Yeah,
Need to
that's one
consult with
I'm gonna
George.
hold off
Yeah.
on that
Yeah.
one.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So
Yeah.
that's a big question mark, but we're excited about it. Okay, last one. This is from Archivos Arkham. Can we expect more custom cards in the next campaigns, or they're exclusive from Scarlet Keys? Do you think having too many of them would be a problem? I guess that customizable cards is probably what we're talking about.
Yeah. So generally speaking, I don't like to do multiple mechanics like that in a row, because I want to see what the reception is first. And we work far enough ahead that if we did it, like if the next campaign immediately also had more customizable cards, I don't know how they're going to be received. You know what I mean? I'd like to see that reception first. Are we going to eventually do more? I don't know. Maybe. That's a decision that we would have to come to in a future date. Who knows? That also means that some mechanics that we've already done might come back at some point. But yeah, there's usually going to be a gap between them, right? For that reason. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Duke, do you have anything to add on that front?
No, just cryptic mutterings and incessant eldritch whispers.
Prophecies.
Yeah. It's possible that there's some mechanics we really like that we want to see more of. I don't know. I'm just saying.
No, maybe.
I'm pining for the return of research cards. One day, maybe. We'll see.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, I think thanks everyone in the chat. Those were some pretty good questions. I think that's pretty much it. But before we go, anything that either of you would like to plug? I mean, obviously buy the Scarlet Keys, right? Obviously, but anything outside of Arkham or FFG or your social media or anything like that?
Wish Thulu.
Read my book.
Oh yeah.
I'm just kidding. I don't know. Here's an exciting thing. The Secrets in Scarlet anthology, if you haven't heard about it, it's one of the many Aconite books that's coming out next year. It is a anthology of stories that are essentially prequel material to the Scarlet Keys. So it's really cool. I got to write one of the stories that's in it. It happens to be about one of my favorite characters. It's not La Chica Roja, but it's really good. However, if you read Secrets in Scarlet, you might learn more about La Chica Roja, and that's cool. You should do that. It's really good. Yeah. Duke?
I mean, you can follow me on pretty much anything at Josiah Duke. And I have a book that I'm working on getting published that I wrote like several years ago, but that's not out yet. So we'll see.
Well, we'll stay tuned. Yeah, publishing is like there's a huge delay, right? Like you write something and then it takes like who knows how long for it to actually. Yeah.
Right.
Does the book have hints on how to get to the secret scenario? No. Unfortunately, I wish that I had thought of that. That actually
Up,
would've been
down,
really
down,
cool.
right, left, right, left.
That will work.
Yeah. Well, thanks everybody. Before we kind of wrap things up, we did want to mention that Arkham Knights was just announced.
Hey.
And some of these folks are going to be there. Not the cat, unfortunately. Maybe.
He's made so much noise. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'll be there. Maxine, will you be there?
Yeah, I'll be there.
Yeah.
I mean, barring some emergency, yeah, I will be there.
We're excited for it.
I'm very excited.
Yeah. So thanks again, MJ, Duke, for both coming on, spoiling the card with us, hanging out, answering questions from chat, showing us Squish Thulu. It was all fantastic. Let us. Sorry. How does everybody feel about the new card? Let us know how you're going to be using Friends in Low Places, and leave us a comment. Email us at comments@mur.fm to stay current on what we're doing. Follow us on social networks, including Instagram and Twitch, or join our Discord server to hang out. You can find the links to all of them at social.mur.fm. Thanks everybody for listening. Thanks folks for being here. And we're going to catch you next time.
Bye.
Everybody.
Everyone.
Duke, about those cheese plates.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are those written down somewhere, like the cheeses that you selected?
I
or
am-
anything?
Yes, it would have been Humboldt Fog, a whiskey cheddar, and I think it was some kind of Gruyere.
You've
Maybe it
already
was a bacon
blasted
brie.
way past my cheese knowledge here, so it sounds great.
Humboldt Fog is
Harrison's
my
in
favorite.
chat. And Harrison knows cheese.